The silence that filled the room after the truth came out was unlike anything I had ever experienced. No one rushed to defend anyone anymore. No one searched for excuses. The facts had spoken more clearly than emotions ever could. For weeks, I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. I thought I would feel victorious. I thought I would finally experience the satisfaction I had been waiting for. Instead, I felt something completely different. Relief. The weight I had carried every single day since discovering the betrayal slowly began to disappear. I wasn't relieved because someone else was suffering. I was relieved because I no longer had to question my own reality. For so long, I had wondered if I had been overreacting. If I had misunderstood. If my instincts had betrayed me. Now I finally knew the truth. And that truth gave me peace. Across the room, the person who had once seemed so confident could no longer meet anyone's eyes. Only a few hours earlier, they had laughed comfortably, convinced their carefully built story would never be challenged. Now every confident smile had disappeared. Every explanation had fallen apart. Every carefully prepared excuse had reached its limit. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. The silence said everything. Friends and family looked at one another, slowly realizing how many moments suddenly made sense. Cancelled plans. Unexpected absences. Broken promises. Details everyone had ignored now connected perfectly. One relative quietly shook their head. "I wish none of this had happened," they whispered. So did I. No one truly wins when trust is broken. The consequences reach far beyond two people. Relationships change. Families change. Friendships change. Even memories begin to feel different. The person responsible finally tried to speak again. The words came slowly. There were apologies. Regret. Promises that things could somehow be repaired. Months earlier, hearing those words might have changed everything. Now they sounded like echoes arriving far too late. Trust isn't destroyed in one moment. It disappears little by little. And rebuilding it takes far more than saying you're sorry. I listened quietly without interrupting. Not because I believed every word. But because I no longer needed to argue. The truth had already answered every question. For the first time since this journey began, I felt completely in control of my own emotions. The anger that had once kept me awake at night was gone. The confusion that had followed every broken promise had disappeared. Even the sadness felt lighter. Not because the pain had vanished. Because acceptance had finally arrived. Over the following days, people naturally began distancing themselves from the person who had chosen dishonesty. No one announced it. No one organized it. It simply happened. Trust, once broken, quietly changes the way people see you. That was the real consequence. Not public embarrassment. Not revenge. The loss of credibility. I realized then that karma doesn't always arrive with dramatic speeches or unforgettable scenes. Sometimes karma arrives through simple consequences. A reputation changes. Relationships become distant. Opportunities disappear. People begin questioning words they once accepted without hesitation. Those consequences often last much longer than a single emotional argument ever could. Meanwhile, my own life slowly began moving forward. I focused on work again. I reconnected with people who had supported me without asking for anything in return. I laughed more often than I had in months. For the first time since everything happened, the future no longer felt frightening. It felt possible. One afternoon, while walking through the same neighborhood where I had once replayed every painful memory, I noticed something surprising. The streets hadn't changed. The buildings hadn't changed. The world around me was exactly the same. The only thing that had changed was me. I was no longer carrying the burden of someone else's choices. That burden belonged to the person who had created the lies. Mine was finally gone. Looking back, I realized revenge had never truly been the goal. Justice was. Justice doesn't require shouting. It doesn't require humiliation. It simply requires the truth to reach the people who deserve to know it. Once that happens, life often takes care of the rest. As the weeks turned into months, I stopped thinking about what I had lost. Instead, I began appreciating what I had gained. Strength, clarity, self-respect, and the confidence to trust my instincts again. The chapter that began with heartbreak had finally reached its end. Or so I believed. Because life has a remarkable way of rewarding those who refuse to let betrayal define them. And just when I thought this story was over, a completely unexpected opportunity appeared, one that proved the best form of karma isn't watching someone else fall. It's watching yourself rise higher than you ever thought possible. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. After everything that had happened, I thought my life would always feel divided into two parts, the person I was before the betrayal and the person I became after it. In many ways, that was true. But I slowly realized that the second version of me wasn't weaker. It was wiser. For the first time in a long while, I stopped waking up with questions I couldn't answer. The endless search for explanations had finally come to an end. There were no more hidden secrets to uncover and no more lies waiting to be exposed. The truth had already done its work. Now it was my turn to begin again. It wasn't easy at first. The house felt quieter than it ever had before. Familiar places carried memories that were impossible to ignore. Even simple routines reminded me of a life that no longer existed. Instead of running away from those memories, I chose to face them. One by one. I packed away old photographs that no longer brought peace. I reorganized my home, donated things I no longer needed, and made space for a future that belonged only to me. Those weren't just physical changes. They were emotional ones. Each small decision reminded me that I still had control over my own life. I also made a promise to myself. I would stop measuring my future by my past. That promise changed everything. I returned to hobbies I had quietly abandoned over the years. Weekend mornings became opportunities instead of reminders. Sometimes I explored new hiking trails. Other days I visited bookstores, small cafes, or parks where I could simply enjoy the peace around me. For the first time in months, I found myself smiling without forcing it. It felt unfamiliar. But it also felt real. Friends noticed the difference. "You seem lighter," one of them said over coffee. I smiled. I finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to carry. Those words surprised even me. But they were true. For so long, I had carried guilt that didn't belong to me. I questioned whether I had worked enough, loved enough, or trusted too much. Eventually, I realized that another person's decision to be dishonest wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of theirs. That understanding lifted a weight I didn't even realize I was still holding. Work also began taking on new meaning. Instead of using it to escape my thoughts, I used it to build confidence again. New opportunities appeared, and this time I accepted them without hesitation. Every challenge reminded me that I was capable of creating a future far better than the one I had lost. Success wasn't measured by promotions or recognition anymore. It was measured by peace of mind. Little by little, life became exciting again. I started saying yes to invitations I would have declined before. I met new people. I laughed at stories that had nothing to do with the past. Most importantly, I stopped introducing myself through my pain. I was no longer the person who had been betrayed. I was simply myself again. One afternoon, while walking through the same neighborhood where I had once questioned every decision I'd ever made, I stopped outside a small park. Families were laughing. Children were playing. Couples were walking hand in hand. Months earlier, Seeing those moments would have reminded me of everything I had lost. This time, they reminded me of everything still possible. Hope had quietly returned. Not because someone else had given it back to me. Because I had rebuilt it myself. That realization filled me with gratitude. The experience had changed me, but not in the way I first feared. It hadn't made me cold. It hadn't made me bitter. Instead, it had taught me the value of protecting my peace without losing my kindness. I learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean welcoming someone back into your life. Sometimes forgiveness simply means refusing to let yesterday control tomorrow. As another season passed, I noticed something else. The memories no longer hurt the way they once had. They became lessons instead of wounds. They reminded me to trust actions more than promises, honesty more than appearances, and my instincts more than excuses. Most importantly, they reminded me that even the darkest chapters eventually end. Standing at the beginning of a new chapter, I looked toward the future with something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Excitement. Not because I knew exactly what would happen next, but because I finally believed that whatever came next, I was strong enough to face it. The betrayal had changed my life, but it had not defined it. In the end, I didn't rebuild the life I had lost. I built a better one. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like the greatest victory of all.